So I'm delighted to introduce our next panel. If the panelists can come up and have a seat while I introduce the moderator, who is Erik Lium, PhD. Erik is the Senior Vice President and Executive Director of Mount Sinai Innovation Partners. We were lucky enough to recruit or steal Erik away from the Bay Area at UCSF about 2.5 years ago, and in that time, we personally have had a fantastic partnership, but more importantly, he has transformed our approach to innovation and partnering in a very deep and meaningful way. I think I'll quote Ken Davison as saying, we believe we have the strongest leadership in any office of this type anywhere in the United States, and that's a credit to Erik. And we never call our office or his office the tech transfer office. That is a very narrow description that barely touches the surface of all the things that Erik and his team accomplish and pursue in partnering with every kind of partner, foundation, pharma, biotech, venture, and it's beginning to have a really transformative difference on our ecosystem here at Mount Sinai. Erik?
Great. Well, Scott, thank you for that kind introduction. And I did want to point out that there are a number of members of the Innovation Partners team here in the audience, and maybe they can raise their hand for a moment. If any of you would like to engage with them about any ideas that you have or anything that we can do to be helpful, please feel free to chat with them after the meeting this morning. The format of this session will follow the same as the prior panels. And what I'd like to do is start with actually asking the panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Lisa here on the end.
Hi, my name is Lisa Boyette. I run an organization called Curable. We're a nonprofit, part think tank, part engineering firm, part research accelerator. So all those management issues that were just discussed in the last talk were a great lead in to kind of what my organization is about. And I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mroczkowski, and I started. So this should be a little bit better. So good morning, everyone. My name is Barbara Mroczkowski, and I started my career as a faculty member at Vanderbilt University Medical School. After Vanderbilt, I joined a very small biotech startup. It was called Icahn Pharmaceuticals, and we actually developed one of the first HIV protease inhibitors, Versant, that's still in use right now. Icahn Pharmaceuticals, after its first success, got acquired by Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, and there I was a director in the oncology therapeutic area. At Pfizer, I led a number of teams that developed a number of targeted therapies for oncology that are currently used in the clinic. Most recently, I'm at the National Cancer Institute, and I've taken on the responsibility of overseeing NCI's experimental therapeutics program. And this is a program that actually simulates a pipeline, a sort of a biotech pipeline, in the sense that we actually have a portfolio of projects that start from early target validation and actually span all the way through phase 3 clinical trials. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Nye from Jansen & Jansen Innovations, where I lead the global Neuroscience Innovation Group, which has centers in Boston, Menlo Park, London, and Shanghai. And we have a team looking at new opportunities, including academic opportunities. So I'm delighted to be here at one of the organizations, one of the institutions where we have many collaborations. My background is I was an MD PhD trainee with Saul Snyder. I did a postdoc with Richard Axel. I was an academic faculty member, first at Columbia in pediatrics and neurology, and then at Northwestern. And I escaped to the industry world about 15 years ago and have done a number of things, including being chief medical officer for the East Coast and led the galantamine and Topamax teams.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carla Rizzuto. I'm a partner with Versant Ventures. We are a early stage biotech VC, one of the more active firms out there on the early stage front. We have about $2 billion under management, based in San Francisco, and recently opened an office here in New York to tap into what we think is a very vibrant research community. Since we've been here for about a year and a half, we've started 3 companies out of New York-based institutions.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amir Tamizh. I'm a program director within the National Institute of Health, NINDS, Neurological Disorders and Stroke, where I lead a program called Blueprint Neurotherapeutics Network. It's a consortium of 15 institutes that are interested in brain disorders that get together, put their monies together to fund small molecule drug discovery and development. What we do is pretty simple. We fund good ideas within academic and startups using various different fundings, including SBIRs. And we take projects from assay development, hit to lead optimization, all the way to phase 1 clinical trials.
Great, so thank you so much. So I thought we'd start off the discussion today by we'll start with Jeff and then have the rest of the panel chime in on really what's your perspective on the evolving role of academia in therapeutic discovery programs, and really can academia increasingly be a source of therapeutic discovery programs for industry? So Jeff, if you wanted to kick us off, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you. And this is a bit of a setup. So we looked together at a paper written in 2011. Some of you may have seen it by Ashley Stevens of BU, focusing on the contributions to the direct patents of drugs that were approved over a certain interval. And the number was about 13%. 248 drugs were approved. Probably more biologics had composition patents as opposed to methods patents for some of the indications of the other drugs. And I wanted to just point this out because I think it really illustrates the growth, and if you look at the paper, there are graphs illustrating the growth and rise in the more direct involvement of academic institutions, not just in discovering the fundamental mechanism, but in really contributing to the translational parts, to finding either the new indication itself or finding the molecule, especially biologics, which came out later, and the discovery of the monoclonal sometimes was the drug. And I think that this illustrates the point that we're all in this together. We're doing it more and more, and I think that if we were to look at universities, they are very eager to continue this ascent into being more involved. Drug discovery centers are popping up at a variety of institutions. The NIH is helping with translational research, and we're delighted to be part of that ecosystem, fostering a number of collaborative types, which we could talk about. But I think that the message I want to convey is that as it goes forward, the academic folks have to look for a new form of entrepreneurship and funding. And it's out there, but they have to become entrepreneurs and learn a little bit more about the sales aspect of pitching their discoveries to new forms of funding organizations, financial, which we're hearing today, companies, industry, which you might not fully understand, and I hope we can clarify, and also finally to new institutions that have models of funding which are quite different and focus on translation.
Great, thank you. Amir, did you want to add something to that?
Well, so just adding a little bit, I'm a little biased because I think working with academics, I find it amazing how many good ideas there are, and unfortunately we just don't have enough funding to pay for a lot of these really amazing ideas that are out there. But just the exercise of writing grants, talking to investors, allows people to sort of modify their story, identify what is really important type of experiments that they need to do, and mold their research such that it resonates with investors and the NIH, such that we can actually have dependent aims. And that's really important for us. We have several mechanisms that we've adopted now that we fund sort of systematic progress towards clinical trials and towards a product, having a product in mind. And so as such, I think it's really important to kind of go through the process and understand what it really takes to put a product together and work backwards, as some of the speakers alluded to today.
Great, thanks. Carla, how about your perspective as an investor? And certainly one that's new to the New York area and seeing how New York is evolving rapidly.
I mean, I think what's happening in New York is incredibly exciting. But stepping back into, and I'll come back to that, stepping back to the big picture, I think the role of academia in drug discovery is only set to increase. One major trend that we certainly see is that pharma companies, which have historically, been fully integrated and done large amounts of internal discovery research, are increasingly looking at networked approaches and external approaches to doing that, to the point where you have companies like Celgene today, which have a very, very small internal research footprint, but a tremendously active external network of drug discovery and early development before they look to bring things in-house. And I think that is a trend that very much will continue.
Great. So maybe we should add to the conversation at this point. One of the things that we talked a lot as we were preparing for the panel was really, what would you like academics to know about drug discovery? What would you like to convey to them through this panel? And so maybe we could start with Barbara and go from there.
I'd like to let the audience know that there are resources out there for doing drug discovery and for clinicians and academicians with a passion for translational medicine. There are avenues. I think there is a need for funding further unmet needs. I think the NIH is trying to fill that need through a number of programs, through Trend. And we've just started a program, too, called the Chemical Biology Consortium, where we also saw that academicians and clinicians at large medical centers bring a lot to the table. So what we're trying to do is not so much replicate what pharma is doing, but we saw that if you bring the right people with the right expertise to the table, you can do things a little bit differently. You can do them a little bit smarter in the sense that you don't have to screen 1,000 molecules. You don't have to do what everyone else is doing. You can look at the target and multidisciplinary team, and with deep biological expertise, you can come up with screening cascades and a strategy for how to try to identify reasonable modalities. And one of the other things that is important is to bring on the clinicians early on, very, very early on, so that you can identify PD endpoints, so that you do know how to stratify patients. And so by building these interdisciplinary teams, and especially bringing academicians, because academicians are folks that, being one of them in my past life, are people that just don't want to routinely repeat what they're doing. They want to come up with a smarter solution to find the end game. So by bringing these people together, we've actually done this already. It's been a 5-year exercise. We've brought a lot of centers of excellence at different universities. Michelle Arkin is here. She's at UCSF. She's one of our centers. Craig Lindsley at Vanderbilt. We've brought all these cores together to help us actually come up not just with a blueprint for identifying and developing a modality, but also to actually do the work and to be engaged. And the level of engagement is important too. In the past, what the NIH used to do was sort of have contracts, and people would come in. If their grant or their application scored highly, we would send out that work, whatever they had, if it was a biologic, it was a small molecule, to do the profiling, and then 2 years down the road, they would get sort of a summary of what the results were. Now it's very different. It's very hands-on. We'll have weekly meetings, and we'll have sub-meetings depending on what the challenges are. And the exciting thing about this is that people actually get involved, and I think they do actually like working together. And so what we have, one of the projects is LDHA. We have Chi Dang, is sort of the deep biology knowledge thinker. He sort of leads the entire team. We have already 6, 7, 8 clinicians. We have a PD endpoint that's imaging already, that's been validated in humans. And people are excited about participating in this. And whenever you have excitement, you always have that momentum. And so for me, I think this is sort of the future, the evolution of actually identifying new targets and identifying new modalities. Thank you.
Great. So Lisa, and maybe then Amir, in terms of your perspective, Lisa, as being part of a nonprofit organization, and then maybe Amir, some of the work that you've done in terms of bringing additional resources through your programs. And then we're going to dive in more specifically to actually funding mechanisms. But I thought maybe your thoughts at a higher level on kind of the expertise, the partnerships that academics should look for as they endeavor to pursue therapeutic discovery.
Well, I think that ties in nicely with a lot of the thoughts that have already come up in the discussion so far. The first being that this is a team sport we're all venturing into. I mean, I think it becomes more and more so every decade. The problems we're going after are more and more complex. The solutions we have to come up with for them are by necessity more and more complex, and no one can be an expert in everything. So in terms of academicians wanting to dive more into therapeutic discovery, perhaps coming from a more basic background, I do think it helps to take on more of an entrepreneurial spirit and really explore what that skill set requires. But at the same time, you can partner with people. You know, I have an engineering degree, I have a medical degree, I have a PhD in molecular physiology. And when my postdoctoral mentor found out I was going to launch a startup, she asked me if I was going back to get an MBA. And I thought, I don't think that is the road, you know, to expediency here. I can partner with an MBA. Actually, I partnered with a couple of MBAs, and I think people coming from the industry side, you know, are used to that. They're used to looking at the whole team. Who is it who's behind this company? You're not going to invest a bunch of money in a company that's going to be run by one person. That person could get hit by a bus next week. So I think the more we can adopt that mentality on the academic side, that, like I said, it's a team sport, and you can really go out and connect with people who are the best at what they do and not have to be the expert in everything yourself. The more easily you can start to pull together some of these larger efforts and diversify your revenue streams at the same time.
Just to echo what Barbara was saying earlier, I think if you look at it at a very high level, proposals that do really well within NIH are the ones that have a really good idea, but they also have PIs that have wrapped themselves around really other good team members. And it really takes a lot of good minds to come together to execute a very complex translational project. I want to use an example for Paul Kenny, who's now here, who's also within our network. So the ingenious way about how he's gone through the translational path is the fact that he actually surrounded himself with a medicinal chemist and assay development person early on and put together a proposal that had all those angles covered. And once he came to the network, he very quickly realized that we needed an industry partner. So he went out and seeked out an industry partner who then was able to bring in additional product development, CMC, and various other sort of aspects of translational research that are very important to get a product developed. So that's what it takes. It takes more than just funding to get things done. And to develop a product, you need many people to come together, sit on the table, and be really committed to the product that you're developing.
Right. So I thought it would be great if we could maybe just expand on that, if you could expand on that, Amir, in terms of, we spent some time talking about the different resources that actually your program brings to beyond funding. So, you know, let's go ahead and get into a little bit more detail about the funding programs that your institute provides, but then also not only talk about the actual funding as in the dollars, but then the support mechanisms that you also can provide through your program.
Just real quick, our program was launched in 2011 before I was actually at NIH. But once I found out about it, I thought the model was amazing, and I just wanted to be a part of it. And I've only been just amazed how well it works. The fact that we not only provide the funding to the lab, but we also provide the contract resources for various topics that, for example, Craig was talking about yesterday. We provide PK, we provide tox studies, we provide medicinal chemistry, various other assay development that are just not readily available to the academic environments. And to top that, we also add number of industry veterans that we have contracts with that can then work directly with the PIs to understand some of the challenges of moving things from early bench to phase 1 clinical trials. So I think that's what's been really the key to our success within our program.
Great, thanks. So Carlo, as an investor, how does Versant and how do you approach the same kinds of things in the work that you're doing?
We have two basic approaches that we work under, right? One is we create companies directly, and I'll put that to the side for the moment. The other thing that we're doing here in New York and in a few other geographies is we've set up incubators. The one in New York is called Highline Therapeutics. And what Highline does is it finds interesting academic programs, and it works with the investigator and the institution to develop a plan to advance that program prior to company formation. And typically what we're trying to do is validate results externally or run a high throughput screen or do some medicinal chemistry. Those are the types of activities we're typically funding. And the intent is to get the program to the point where we can make a data-driven decision around forming a company or not. But very importantly, what we're bearing in mind when we're doing those activities is, number one, the reproducibility crisis, if we can call it that I think has been commented on very extensively elsewhere. This is a fundamentally important aspect of biology. I think it's just inherent to some extent in biology. And then secondly is, the enormous risk of advancing a therapeutic program. I'm not sure how many people appreciate exactly how risky it is to get a preclinical program all the way to approval, but it's probably on the order of 1%, the likelihood that you get there. So those are the kinds of things that we're seeking to address with these funding mechanisms.
Great. Jeff, I thought you could jump in and talk a little bit about what Jansen and...
Sure. And to your earlier question, what are we looking for? We're looking for relationships, people who are in the field and want to talk to us, and we hope we're credible scientists that we can be on the other side of the good conversations, and we try to be. And we're also looking for people to show us ideas that are relevant. So every company, every institution has its own sort of preference. And we have ours, which happens to be Alzheimer's disease and mood disorders. In the neurosciences, of course, every other group has its own list. And we can co-create projects together, and we've been very creative. We worked with the NIH to help them establish an iPS cell model, which led to an award called the U19 Award, which was just granted, and we're a small part of it, but it's a much bigger thing than us for psychiatric diseases. We're going to celebrate that next week. We worked with the Wellcome Trust to develop a very large award for neuroimmunology with 10 academic labs in the UK. We worked with Hopkins Brain Sciences and Sanford Burnham's neuroscience group to develop large collaborations. But I should say that the one thing that we're not going to do is write large grant checks. We really want to work together in the collaborative way that Barbara described, showing our expertise and using it when it's relevant, and the academic expertise when it's relevant. And we want to design the project so that it's most impactful and advances, and we want to track that advancement in a kind of a project management way.
Great, thanks. So Barbara and Lisa, do you want to add anything to this particular subject, or should we move on? Great.
I would just say that to this point about project management and tracking, I loved the last talk and the talk about deadlines. I think having some kind of mark for where you want to be is a great tool for monitoring as you go forward, and even if you don't make it, setting those goals is very important.
So that's great. That's a great lead into one of the additional topics we wanted to discuss, which is really what do you see happening within industry, within academia, government, nonprofit around actually managing these programs. So kind of this theme of alliance management that comes up. So I don't know, Barbara, did you want to chime in on that?
So yes, I can give you sort of a flavor of how we manage our programs, because some of them are actually really very large and people from different locations. We try to have as many face-to-face meetings as possible. We always try to bring on new people with expertise, with fresh eyes. That's very, very important. We do set milestones, and so that everyone around the table does keep track and understand that at the end of the day, we're trying to develop a therapeutic. A lot of people tend to go off on tangents. We find some exciting science. We've just recently published, actually in Science, on a high-resolution cryo-EM structure of a very complex protein. So in the process, we're also doing some novel science that gives us an idea, is this really a target or pathway that's amenable to therapeutic intervention? And that in itself, I think, is of large value to the entire community, not just to pharma and biotech. So these are, we do have the milestones. Our first milestone, which goes back to sort of this, what we call our difficulty with substantiating published data in pretty much out in the public domain. Our statistics, so we have a pipeline, and it spans all the way, as I said, from early target validation through phase 3, and a lot of the projects that come in requesting IND-enabling resources, so these are projects that have nominated a biologic already, they have a product in hand, be it a small molecule. When we try to recapitulate the in vivo data, we've had a horrific experience, 90% failure. Part of that is because the in vivo mouse models we use in oncology are complex. But it's very disappointing, and it's very disappointing for us because it takes a lot of time and a lot of funding. And one of the things, this is very new for NIH, to be funding early discovery. So we have limited funds. And so that, we've come up with guidelines. We've put up guidelines on our website for applicants. But at the end of the day, it's still an N of 3 somebody brings in. And then the problem is a lot of these academicians don't have the resources to be able to do an N of 40 in vivo. So where is that? How do we try to find a balance there? And that's something I grapple with too.
Just a quick quip is that I think we all can learn a lot from the venture model, which is you don't get the money unless you achieve the milestone. I mean, that might be a very loose interpretation.
Maybe I was going to bring that up. When we do these grants through an entity like Highline, what we do is upfront we'll invest in bringing in experts to develop a plan together with the academic and the institution, and we'll always have the funding milestone driven, but we don't overdo it. We'll have one milestone, and it's typically a 12-month project. But then what we don't do is we don't spend a lot of time project managing, and that's for a specific reason, which is that we want to see self-selection of the folks who are doing the work, and see their kind of hunger and appetite. And of course, there are technical things that go wrong, but that's a big part of what we're looking for, because our mindset's maybe a little bit different, which is we're looking to create a company, and ultimately we've got to have the right types of people driving that. So that's our approach.
Well, yeah, and I mean, that certainly emphasizes the need for, in that case, the investigator to be very diligent about moving the project forward and moving it forward rapidly to demonstrate what you're looking for to move to actually company formation. So where is most of the funding going right now? So what would you predict, really, where is it now and where is it going? Amir, maybe you could comment on that.
So historically, our institute has funded the best science. So we've not really had a specific criteria through which we would select projects. At the same time, if you look at what we've been doing in terms of expenditure, we've spent about $100 million a year on translational projects. And we are constantly looking for good projects to come in. The Aging Institute, which is also part of this consortium, just got a bolus of funding for Alzheimer's disease. So we are already seeing a lot of applications coming in for AD. So there is funding available. We're just looking for projects that have the right team, the right proposal, and the right environment, such that there is a commitment to training, there's a commitment to milestones, and there's a commitment to saying what experiments are really nice to have and what are the experiments that are really on a critical path. Because projects that come in ultimately have a goal, and that's to have a product that will get tested in a phase 1 clinical trial. And we only have 5 years and roughly $10 million for each project, so we just have to be constantly vigilant about what we do and what we don't do. And PIs that do quite well in this environment are the ones that actually really focus on getting to the phase 1 trial with the product and have additional funding to do the nice-to-have projects through other mechanisms.
Great. So that kind of brings us to, and we almost covered the issue of what are your expectations when you actually provide funding or you partner with an organization. But I don't know, Lisa, did you want to expand a little bit more on that? You know, what are you really looking for at the end of the day? You've identified a group, you're working with them. You know, what are your expectations at the end of that? And really throughout the process as well, but I think Amir touched on some of that.
Yeah, well, since we're coming more from the consumer end of the pipeline than the supplier end of the pipeline, being a patient-oriented organization, we're looking for that critical path approach. So the people that we partner with are very outcome-focused, be that a product that's going to be a therapeutic or a diagnostic or some other unmet need we're looking to fill in the patient community. But really, we're also looking for good alignment of priorities. I think there are a lot of smart people out there that you can work with, but if you don't have great alignment around what your goals are, especially in a short period of time, you can waste a lot of time and everyone leaves frustrated, maybe not achieving what you set out to. So I think back to this idea of relationships, really knowing the people around you and kind of who has not only what base of expertise, but maybe what they're looking to develop in their own organization is how we've kind of selected our partnerships so far. And it gets tricky for us because we serve as kind of a middleman. So we're trying to put together academicians who are interested in a particular domain area with companies who want to move a particular portfolio forward. So that understanding is key.
Great, thanks. So Barbara, the NCI puts quite a bit of funds to work every year. Again, how do you think about these particular issues? As well as within the field of oncology, do you see the funding landscape shifting at all into specific subfields?
So I'm a little biased as a molecular oncologist here. We spend quite a bit of money, especially now with the Moonshot Initiative, on clinical trials. One of the reasons that this was sort of embraced at the NCI, it's very different. It's a very different model. It's a closed system model. The NIH is not happy with having a closed system model where the IP really goes back to the inventors, and we have to put a lot of effort in facilitating IP sharing because there's so many parties engaged. So this isn't just it's not a simple model. It's a very complex model. One of the reasons that it actually did get some traction was because there is a paucity of experimental agents entering early phase clinical trials. And there's only so many combinations you can do. What we were noticing with people just combining things randomly. And that's really not an answer either. And we also noticed that really the PD endpoints weren't appropriate. So especially in oncology, many of these trials failed not because the agent or the modality was not efficacious. We just did not have the ability to stratify the patients. So we're putting a lot of effort now in patient stratification and one-patient trials, not only us, but also the TREND program. So basically for small niche populations, we're trying to understand why people respond, why people didn't. Part of that is having a good idea of target engagement in these individuals. Everybody's going to respond differently to a different modality. It's just our genetic makeup. Part of this is we're going to have to be able to understand that response in real time as the patient evolves and their tumor evolves. So for me, I think we need to spend more money on this partnership with academia to come up and test new targets, new signaling pathways for different indications, and to put that out in the public domain through publications to see whether this is sort of a futile direction. If it's a futile direction, we need to put that out as well as to proceed and test it in early phase clinical trials.
To the question of percentages, I'd say, and this is just a rough estimate, we have about a third in licensing deals, which are opportunities that are far enough along that we've identified something that looks like the product or maybe a late-stage program. About a third in investments in companies. We work closely with our JJDC group, which is essentially part of J&J Innovation. In neuro, we've started about 5 companies: epigenetics, neurodevelopmental disorders. I think Carla is on 1 or 2 of them. And how we manage them is really quite different because in the case of the the companies, it's very much more hands-off, and we're learning how to be on the SAB and not contaminate ourselves, for instance. And then the third is the collaborative work that I was describing earlier, where we have a number of research collaborations where the external group or the internal group are really cheek by jowl working with the academic or the small company, frankly.
Great, thanks. So I think we should transition to a Q&A session now. And I'll go ahead and get that started with the first question that has come in online, which I'm going to try to interpret, which is, I believe is in vivo data necessary for receiving SBIR or STTR funding? Are there any exceptions, and what are they? And so I'd say, Amir, that...
Is it necessary? It's a nice to have. We discuss it internally all the time, and it has to do with the type of indication you're after, what kind of patient population you want to treat. Is there a model available? Is the model meaningful? So we spend a lot of time and effort trying to fund projects to develop models and to validate models, to understand whether the therapy can actually get to the target. And so that's where we really want to focus on. But there are many diseases. We oversee about 600 diseases at NINDS. And I can tell you, we only have really validated model for very, very few of them. So if you had to wait for models to be developed before we can move the projects forward, we'll be waiting for a long time, and that would just not be practical.
Great, thanks. So are there any additional... for questions, if you could come down to the microphone, that would be great.
Thank you very much for a great panel. One question I have is about the future of what I see as an emergent trend, which is patient groups, and that would be addressed to Lisa and possibly to Jeff. Patient groups directly co-financing the development of new drugs. Examples, for instance, of the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation that co-financed with Aurora and then Vertex, Kalydeco for a very, very rare mutation for which traditional pharma would not, which would have been too small for a traditional pharma. So do you see more of that actual direct co-financing of therapies from the patient groups?
I personally haven't seen it too much, and do have some concerns about patients themselves paying, which might be coercive or an undue influence on the integrity of the clinical trial. But I understand about financing through advocacy organizations. And one of the questions that's sort of underlying what you say is about, should rare diseases, orphan diseases be part of what pharma does? And I think the answer has been resoundingly yes among a number of pharma companies. Not every single one of them. We happen to be on the less inclined spectrum than other groups, but venture companies are starting up rare disease companies. Some of the big pharmas are offering rare disease divisions, and I think it's been very, very productive these days. So I see if that's another route to funding and it doesn't create any regulatory or ethical considerations, it does seem quite like a good idea.
Thank you.
Any additional questions?
I forgot to introduce myself, François Simon, Mount Sinai. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if I can just add one item to that. In majority of our cases, our investigators that have been successful translating things towards clinical trials have cobbled up various funding opportunities to get things done. And advocacy groups and nonprofits have been critical in providing the funding, either a gap funding or the resources that majority of our PIs really need to push things forward. So there's a lot of credit that needs to go to those organizations that are really working really hard to making sure that their science has been heard.
Can I just add one additional thing? So I was having this exact same conversation with Henry Tremere several months ago, and one of the excellent points he made was that, especially in early stage companies, sometimes really small dollars make the difference between something dying or not, particularly in the rare disease world where there may be a hard sell with attracting larger companies into that space. I think the role of advocacy organizations in industry is something that's evolving. We've seen big changes in the last several years. It used to very much be the mentality that for-profit companies are the dark side, and nonprofits or academics or people that it's safe for advocacy groups to be investing in. But when you're talking about biotech companies or early stage pharma, and this might be the key therapy that makes a difference for your patient population, I think we have to be more and more open to keeping those pipelines open and alive.
I was just going to add that for many of our early stage companies, patient organizations are an important source of funding. And beyond the funding itself, access to patients and really understanding the disease in much greater depth is an incredibly important part of developing a therapeutic. I think we are increasingly seeing even more proactive roles from patient organizations, and I think the Leukemia Lymphoma Society just co-funded a startup out the gate, which is really interesting, and something that we would be very open to, and we've actually started being approached by different patient groups to think about collaborating around company formation.
Great, so I think we have a question here.
Yeah, I'm Lakshmi Devi from Mount Sinai. I've been asked this question many times. As an academic, when is it correct time to start a biotech company on your own? Or when do you decide to partner with big pharma? What are your ideas and thoughts on when do you make these transitions and decisions?
I could take a first crack at that. The short answer is it depends. I would say the typical early stage academic spin-out has sort of a novel composition of matter. It has activity in an animal model, but there's going to be a lot more work to do to optimize the composition before it's ready to go into IND-enabling studies. So I would say that's the typical, but it's really variable. Whether it's a platform technology or a single asset or something else, it's very hard to say. But I would say that sort of be the standard approach.
I guess I've seen it be a matter of taste and all ranges of activity. So working with someone who wants to spin out a company, he's a postdoc and he's discovered something great and he wants to go. So that founds the formation of the team. And an entrepreneur-like person, I think that's very powerful. In other cases, academic group wants to publish a lot of papers, capture the field, and maybe have a big hit later. So I think the academic groups, it's a matter of taste, and also relationships with VCs or pharma companies could persuade them one way or another. But one of the questions that always comes up is, what's too early, for any sort of partnership? And I think it's really it's dependent on the strategic interest of the partner. And so if you come to us with pretty early stage, for instance, mood disorder stuff, but it's solid, we'll really talk to you. But if you come to us with something in an area we're not in, but we might buy a drug like Parkinson's, we probably won't talk to you about anything early at all. Just as I was saying, know your partner if you're going to be entrepreneurial and sell things.
Yeah, I think that goes, I was just going to add, I think it goes to one of the comments earlier, I think, Jeff, that you made about how you communicate your science to a potential partner. I think the number of factors that influence a decision of when's the right time to, for example, license, whether it be licensed to a larger company or to a smaller company. Obviously, in the case of a smaller company, often it's in the context of forming an academic spin-out. There's so many factors that play into that the answer to your question is quite complex. But I think the panelists actually identified a few of them there today.
Thanks.
So SBIRs were mentioned earlier. Every institute within NIH has to set aside specific amount of funds to fund startups. For NINDS is about 3.5% of our budget. That's about $50 million a year. Mm-hmm. And we are always looking for good projects to get funded in that space.
I think all this is also dependent on your institutional resources, at your academic institution. If you're at a very savvy, sophisticated place like Mount Sinai, where they have a great tech transfer office and can put a bunch of support around you, you're going to have a lot better chance with a spinoff. If you're at a place that's if your project's going to be dead on arrival because of institutional hindrances, then maybe it makes sense to identify a bigger partner to help you along.
Yeah, so I appreciate Lisa saying that, because I was going to also say that certainly here Innovation Partners will work with members of our community on these kinds of issues. And again, they're very complex, so we'll work with individuals to really help make this kind of a decision. So I believe we're out of time, and there's one, is there time for one? So there's one more question that came in online. Do any of the groups represented by the panel provide services or access to collaborations for small molecule optimization?
Yes.
Yeah.
If we're willing to partner on it.
So we are two. We're limited, unfortunately, to oncological indications, but we certainly support pretty much everything from, as I said, target validation through phase 3 clinical trials. One of the things is that you are going to have to work in large teams and be willing to work in large teams, multi-center groups.
So for us, absolutely, and we do that a couple different ways. One is we can get resources at a CRO like a WuXi. Another way that we do this is we actually have in-house within Highline very, very experienced medicinal chemists who can work directly on a program.
And obviously for Blueprint Neurotherapeutics Network, this is what we do. We provide you in-kind resources for MedChem for about 3 years out of the 5 years that you're in a network, and we help you with head-to-lead, lead optimization, whatever it takes to take a small project to a lead compound that can go into IND-enabling studies.
Great. Well, join me in thanking our panelists. I'm sure that